This is Designing Security Products, where we talk about the intersection of cybersecurity, research, and product design. And today I'm talking with Ty Foster, who is the founding product designer at Icite. So thanks for being here today, Ty.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to talk with you. Let's start by telling us a little bit, tell me a little bit about what you do and kind of on the day to day. Where do you work and what do you do there?
So I work at Icite. We are building an identity tool specifically for security operations. And I basically run obviously all of design, which kind of encompasses, everything UX research, UI, UX, and then we've been doing a lot of like discovery customer conversations. And then the other part is kind of doing product. So figuring out like what we should be building, what's like working with our CEO and founder Wes around what the strategy of the company should be. And that's, something we're constantly trying to hone in, especially in a very early stage company.
Yeah, you mentioned early stage. How big are you guys? How long have you been running?
Yeah, so we're 10 people. Myself, well, I guess the better way to think about it is the entire team is like 9 engineers. And then I do everything that's not engineering. So that's kind of how it breaks up. And then we were funded last year, so in 2024. So we've been around basically since like September or October of last year. So very early.
Okay, awesome. That's exciting time. Still a lot to figure out, right? And tons of experimentation. The way we got connected is Wes, the founder, and I were at a conference and we're having a conversation, and I was talking with him about UX research and I was getting prepared for him to say, a lot of times early stage security companies, or not even early stage, right? There's not a ton of research that is being done. And he said, well, actually, UX designer and I had 20 or 30 conversations with the target audience before we even put anything in front of them. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Tell me more about that. He's not here, so why don't you tell me more about
Yeah, Wes is a bit of an anomaly. He kind of really embodies UX and UI. Like that was something like that's very core to him, which makes my life a little easier. And, instead of constantly fighting about whether we should do UX or like research or not, he's all in. So when Wes was going around beginning to like kind of pitch and look for funding for this company, we actually worked pretty closely together, and that was like March of last year, where our goal was basically to kind of falsify Wes's idea of what he wanted to build. So he's been in the industry for 20 plus years. So he reached out to a bunch of contacts we had, and I had helped structure sort of a discussion guide for him where it allowed him to ask the exact similar questions to every single one of those individuals. And then after those discussions, we'd go back and dump all their answers into a giant spreadsheet and kind of highlight stuff. It was like a very simple way to do sentiment analysis to kind of figure out like where we onto something, where we like way off. All those conversations help Wes in sort of the pitch. So when he was in front of investment firms like VCs, he could basically pull from those conversations. And that was super helpful. So I guess the UX starts like even before we got funding. But once we were funded, we had a much better idea of what we wanted to build. And from there, we spent probably the first 2 months just talking to potential prospects, talking to folks we'd worked with at previous companies, and really trying to understand like where were their pain points around identity, what opportunities would they have. One of the toughest questions you can ask, but I still think it's helpful, is like if you could, you had a magic wand, what would you build? Because you kind of go off in a bunch of different tangents, but those are sort of the questions we were asking. Is like, what do you spend a lot of your time doing that you hate, around identity? Asking what does your team spend a lot of time doing? What are their pain points? So we gathered all that, and that really helped us kind of narrow our focus.
Very cool. So while you and Wes were having these conversations with the target audience, and I think what you said was trying to prove his assumptions wrong. Is that kind of the approach that you took? Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, the last thing you want to do is make yourself feel good and like hear what you want to hear. But in reality, what we really wanted to do was prove ourselves wrong. Like these are all false assumptions. So let's try to figure out what reality is and work from there. So that was the goal, early on.
Very cool and unusual. I haven't heard anybody. I'm sure that happens, but I've never heard someone specifically say, "Yeah, my goal in talking with these these customer prospects is to find out where I'm wrong, right? And to get them to say, no, you're way off base. Okay, so that's interesting. So you guys are talking with these target audience. So there's an engineering team also. Like, is the engineering team part of the team yet? And if they are,
Yeah.
what are they doing while you guys are doing this research?
Well, I mean, there's clearly like we had a pretty good understanding of like we were going to build a SaaS application, like a web app. So there's like foundational stuff that they could start building, kind of standing up, just like general infrastructure stuff. But one of the things, so if I could take a small step back, so prior to working at Icite, I did work with Wes at an MDR company, and I ran the product and design, or I ran the product design team there, which consisted of myself and two other designers. And I think one thing we struggled with a lot there between us and the product team and engineering was we had a team of about 30 with product engineering and design. Was where do we store all the research? How do we constantly like share it? Or how do we like reference it once we're like in, trying to solve a problem and working on a feature? And then how do we share all that out? And there we had stuff in spreadsheets, we had stuff in Figma, we had stuff in FigJam. It's kind of like all over the place. So one thing I wanted to do here right off the bat was like everything needs to be centralized. It needs to be referenceable, and I need to be able to share it out. It feels like a plug. I'm not sponsored by them, but like Dovetail is a tool we use. It's great. And when we're having these conversations, either early discovery conversations or now we're having, getting a prototype in front of prospects and getting feedback, all those conversations are recorded and everything lives in Dovetail, and we tag everything. So early on, we were tagging things by sentiment. So pain points, wants, needs, opportunities, that kind of thing. And now we're really tagging things by features. So like the core features that we know we've gotten a lot of validation around that we think we're going to build, those get tagged by features. And then there's a sentiment portion that gets added onto that. All those, and to answer your question specifically, what engineering team was doing, as soon as those conversations are done, we're sharing those links out from Dovetail to the engineering team, and they're going through and re-listening to it. And that way everyone's on the same page. So they're not hearing the story from me. Like, I heard something different from this customer, and then I just shared out anecdotally to the team. Everyone's hearing the recording. And then we have discussions. So everyone is kind of on the same page, which has been incredibly helpful.
Yeah, that's great. That's always a challenge, is you're gathering all of this great information, and then how do you get other people involved, not just to kind of show the value of research, right, which is another topic we could or could not talk about, but them getting to benefit from that too, and kind of hearing and seeing firsthand, this is what customers say, or that thing that we all thought was going to be really intuitive. Here's some user tests where people are just like, yeah, I don't know what I do next. So we all thought it was going to be great.
Yeah. And the one actually interesting thing is, and I'm sure you know this, when you're doing it like research or you're interviewing customers, oftentimes there's a balance between I'm trying to actively listen, but also I'm trying to figure out what direction do I want to go next so I can further uncover like this unknown that we have. So oftentimes you miss things. And what's been super helpful is the engineering team will be like, oh, how come you didn't follow up on this? Or how come you forgot to ask about that? And we'll go ahead and jot those down. So next time we're on the call with that prospect, we can follow up with those questions or make sure that we're like a little bit more thorough on drilling into specific avenues. So again, like sharing it out has been, super helpful. It also makes the engineering team feel like they're part of like the what are we building kind of thing versus we figured it out. Now we're just to go build it kind of thing. It removes that dynamic with the engineering team.
One of the things we were talking about before we hit record was how everybody, whether you are on sales and you're selling something, or you're the engineer that's building something, or you're the designer that's designing something, or the researcher that's finding out what should be designed and built, everybody wants to create something that people really find value in and that it really solves a problem for people. And so I think that's a challenge that UX folks have, is that they need to find a way to get everyone involved and kind of see that pain up front, that what they're doing actually matters, rather than just, I wrote 300 lines of code today. It's more like, this is a problem that I saw, and now I'm helping build something that makes this person's life better. Is that, I mean...
No, it totally resonates. I think it really gives people a sense of ownership and purpose. Bingo.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So you talked a little bit about the discussion guide. So How did you determine what questions should go in that discussion?
Part of it was from experience. So the prior tool that we built, this MDR provider, like, we spent a bunch of time doing research. So I kind of have a better understanding of like what questions we should ask. But I will say, MDR, managed detection and response, again, like we weren't deep on identity there. So now that I'm an identity specific company, I lean heavily on our engineers and Wes, our founder, to kind of formulate some of these questions. Two of the folks on our team, Mike and Kevin, they're I hate seeing the term like SMEs, subject matter experts. Like these guys are deep in identity tools. They're both consumers of them, so we've deployed them all at our previous MDR company. And then Wes, he's got a ton of experience as well. So between the three of them, like we have conversations about like what are we trying to understand? What problem are we trying to solve? Like how can we formulate questions? And that's generally how we're figuring out like what avenue should we steer this conversation into to basically uncover the things we don't know, some of those like ambiguous concepts, also like some of the pain points we've already identified, like uncovering those. And I think once we've kind of narrowed in on a problem space, it's easier for me to kind of dig into that because I am so new and I don't know. So, there's that, new person
Yeah.
benefit or whatever it's called, so that's been helpful, just being constantly learning and being sort of the amateur here
Yeah,
has
you
been
don't
helpful.
I don't know what you call that, but I've heard of people who have a lot of experience as having the burden of knowledge. Like they know so much about it. It's like, oh, here's the way you do this. And so they might be less likely to try a path that hasn't been done before, right? Like it can be kind of messy, and sometimes that messy stuff leads to a breakthrough. So I think there's value in having people who know a lot about the subject and having some people who don't, right? It's kind of things are new and fresh, and they can ask questions. So that's really cool. So I think what I'm hearing from you is that you've got a small team and there's a lot of collaboration between engineering, between leadership and the product team, design, all of that, right? So what advice would you give to someone who is maybe in a larger organization that wants to have that collaboration and they're not sure what the first step is for them to take?
Yeah. I think the real key, maybe it sounds simple, but I understand the difficulties is really like over communicating and just kind of full transparency. I think oftentimes, speaking from a designer standpoint, you get into Figma and you start designing, and then it's basically the solution's kind of like somewhat solidified. And then you're like, hey team, this is what I came up with. And then engineering or even product oftentimes is just sitting there thinking like, okay, well, they already figured out the problem, so we're just here to like execute on what they built. And that doesn't feel super collaborative. So oftentimes, even at the previous company I was at, where it was a 30-person team, we would have, oftentimes during stand up, we just have the design team share out what we're working on, what research is coming up, like what we're working on. And oftentimes we would just invite engineers to be part of that interview, so they would sit in those calls, but oftentimes they may ask a question, but most of the time they're just there to listen. And that like really kind of solidified that team cohesiveness. And I think the other big thing we had was we had a weekly meeting on Thursdays. It was an hour long, and it was basically engineering and design. And it was design's time to say, here's what we're working on. Here's what's in flight. Actually, there's this one feature we're working on. And it's like, we're stuck. Can we just walk through it and then get input from other people? And like they're not quote unquote designers, but engineers come to the table with like some great ideas. So that hour meeting we had once a week was one of the better meetings. And that was like a lot of the feedback we got from engineering was like, thanks for just including us in the design process.
Yeah, that's great. I guess it's wanting to have that ownership, right? If they feel involved, not only do you get, it makes them feel good, but also you get that diverse perspective. I know that I've been in discussions with a developer before, and they say, oh, well, if you would do it this way, then that would be like half the work of the way you have it designed. And then I look at them like, that would work just as well. It's like 90% as good as, or maybe let's be real. it might even be a better solution, right, than what we had designed.
Hmm.
And it's going to be easier for the developer to be able to build and maintain. If you're not getting those insights from them, then it can be literally costing you the developer time of them being in these meetings.
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to be told what to do, right? It doesn't feel good. Like, in some orgs, it's like product telling design, go design this thing. And it's like, well, why? Why am I designing this thing? Like, I wasn't part of like the decision or the understanding as to like how we arrived at this is what we need to design. Much like engineering is like, well, why do I need to build this? Like, I want to understand the why. Like, why do I need to build this? Like, are there other ways we can do it? And I think, again, just collaborating. And as I mentioned before, I was very fortunate to be in teams that were just radically transparent. Like, everyone was open and honest.
So one of the things I love to hear is a real story of where the team had an assumption of this is what we think is going to be helpful for users. And then when you talked with users, when you tested with users, you found out you were dead wrong. So do you have any stories like that?
Yeah, I think rarely do I come up with an idea and then get in front of customers where they're like, you nailed it. I think most of the time, you hear something or it's like something that maybe you saw in another product that you're like, oh, we should just add it to our product because you think it's cool. Maybe you like totally have your designer hat on. And then you get in front of customers and they're like, nah, like that's not it. I think one thing that comes to mind for the company here, which is we wanted to play specifically in the identity space. And one idea we had was, well, we understand that identity, this is very specific to identity. So generally what we've heard is it's owned by multiple teams. So, if you think about identity lifecycle, it's owned by the HR team. IDPs are owned by the identity team or IT, or rarely does anything owned by, security operations. So like we're just gonna have a tool that anybody on these teams can log into, and then you can just manage identity from this tool. It'll be easy. So we get in front of customers, we start talking about it, and we walk them. This is at the point where we're walking through a prototype, and 3 or 4 customers in, right out one after another, they would pause and they're like, "This is cool, but who owns it?" And we're like, "What do you mean who owns it?" And they're like, "Well, who owns this tool? Like, do we own the tool in IT, or does security operations own the tool, or does HR own the tool, or does IT, or in some cases, does the identity only team own this?" And that kind of stopped us in our tracks. So then we would kind of talk about like, well, we would just implement RBAC, just come in and anybody can do it. And they're like, yeah, but like when we say who owns it, who's going to pay for it? Because you got to like, someone has to own the whole bill. And then that in itself, that like stopped us in our tracks effectively. And then we kind of pivoted to the tool that we're the building now is like a tool specifically for security operations. But that one kind of problem space is like, we'll just build a tool that everybody owns. And then not a single customer was okay with, well, we'll foot the bill. And then all these other teams could use it. Like that was a huge stopping point for us.
That's one of the things I think that is so interesting about security products at an organization, period, right? Is that the security products, most of the time, they affect everyone in the organization, right? But then there's just one department that is typically footing the bill for that, even though everybody from every part of the organization, if the security is not working properly, then they're all at risk, right?
And I mean, there's real legitimate reasons why, there's like least, what is it, least access permissions, I think is the way it's stated. Maybe I'm stating it a little wrong, but like there's a real reason why analysts or investors like IR or don't have access to the IDP or write access to the IDP. Similar to why those individuals in security operations don't have write access to the HR system. Like there's real implications for allowing everyone in the org to have access to everything, and having a tool that just gives everyone access to everything because it'd be great and super easy. Frictionless. Like frictionless is like kind of a bad thing in when it comes to security. You want to make things difficult, with the mindset that someone's going to infiltrate the environment at some point.
Yeah, what is it? It's not a matter of if, but when, and then what are you going to do when it happens, right?
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a trope at this point, but like that is the deal, and you want to make it difficult for when they do get in.
yeah,
You
interesting.
know,
Yeah. Well, so we were talking about security, but I know before we were talking about how you and I, neither one kind of came from security. Obviously, everyone has a point where they're not just born into a security family, probably, right? That understands all of this stuff and they're talking about stuff around the dinner table when they're in elementary school. So, how did you get into security work? And then I'll ask another question. So, we'll start with that.
Okay. So I started my career off as a consultant, as a product design consultant, and I worked with, fintech and telecom primarily. And then there's, I mean, someone I worked with before, had gotten a job at this MDR provider and reached out and asked like, "Hey, I think you'd be a great fit." I've always been kind of, personally, I'm obsessed with privacy and security. So it's kind of like a just a, I'd say a hobby, but I think my friends and family would say that privacy is more than a hobby. It's sort of like an obsession for me. But that just led me into, being a potential candidate and then interviewed and started working at the MDR company.
Yeah. So you said that you were already kind of obsessed with privacy and security. Uh, that must be the reason you asked for my 4-digit PIN code before you agreed to meet with me today, right?
Yeah, I already knew it. I just did some OSINT,
Oh,
figured it out.
you're just wanting to make sure that I knew. I already know. I'm asking for a friend. I just want to make sure you
Yeah,
know that I know what it
I'm
is.
just verifying you as you.
Nice, nice, very good.
Yeah.
So the transition over from product design into kind of security focused product design. What are the things that are different? Were there any things that surprised you when you got in? You're like, wow, this is way different than I thought it would be working in the security space versus working in some other product design space.
I think it's just a deep level of knowledge that
Mhm.
most people have inside of the space. That and the technical expertise that your users have. So I think, I guess there's two ways to think about this. You need to get up to speed super quickly. So there's a ton of content. Most of the people who've been in the space have, you know, either love hacking or have been involved in hacking or red team or blue team or whatever it is. So they've been in the industry for a while. And then you need to get up on speed so you're basically on the same level as them. And then you need to understand everything almost from first principles so you can go and design workflows that make sense for these people. So it's a lot of drinking from the proverbial fire hose from the beginning. But it's not unlike finance where there are like specific terms and stuff that you just have to get up to speed. So I think the ability to be comfortable with ambiguity in the beginning is really important, and then willingness to learn like super fast and learn. There's a lot of nuances and very a lot of things that's very specific to cybersecurity.
Yeah. Speaking of specific to cybersecurity, do you find it difficult to find enough users that are the right type? Like if you have a persona that you're trying to do some research on, is it more challenging to find people to be able to have conversations and user testing sessions with?
That's a great question. I don't know if it's difficult to find individuals, but there's a level of difficulty, and like I mentioned, we try to record most of our sessions just so we can share them with the team. Oftentimes people don't want to be recorded. Oftentimes people don't want to be on camera. They really want to share their screen. They're a little cagey around what information they do want to share, like specific flows. Like, tell me how you like walk. Can you walk me through that? And it's more high level, and there's a reason for that. So I think that from a, user research standpoint is a little difficult.
Okay, so it's more getting them to share freely or you being able to record it rather than it is finding the people and getting them to agree to the sessions. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's probably good. I mean, you're asking them like, hey, can you walk me through how you set up your groups in Okta or how your groups in Entra is set up? Like, can you share your screen and walk through that? Generally, they're like, no, we're not going to do that. Whereas like, in finance, like you're walking through tools or like, can you share my screen and show me how you're doing this? And most times people are like, yeah, okay, I'll share that with you. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, and I guess in the finance side, would they be sharing a screen that has like real numbers from their organization and stuff? Or is it that typically not the type of stuff that you were when you were doing stuff with the finance space?
No, it's generally like, I guess to be more specific about that, what I was doing was designing internal tools for employees. So that was and I guess if I could broaden the question up just a little bit, I would say designing tools internally at a company is one hand awesome. because you have an infinite number of users who want to sit down and talk to you. They like that's part of their job is to like help make their internal tools better. Here, you're asking people like, can they take time out of your day? And then it's like, okay. And then it's like, all right. And can you share me how you're doing all your security stuff inside your company and potentially share your screen so I can understand it better? And at that point, they're like, no.
And a lot of times they'll just flat out just say, yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. We've had a couple of people like, absolutely do not record this session. Like, I'll talk to you, but do not share or do not record anything. So you just get really good at taking notes. But even then, like that becomes at an expense because now you're paying attention just a little bit less because you're trying to jot down notes and pay attention and then try to ask questions, which is why it's been really helpful to have Wes, the founder of the call. So one of us will end up taking notes and the other one will ask the questions. And then I'll be slacking him follow-up questions after I'm writing down the notes.
Yeah, that's great. So in those sessions, are you visible to the person that's having the conversation with Wes, or are you just kind of silently on the screen, or does the person that you're interviewing even know that there's someone else besides Wes that's
No, we're generally both on camera.
okay?
Yeah, we've taken a pretty strong on-camera presence whenever we're talking to people, especially customers.
Yes, I mean, I think that's so valuable. I think that I remember I did a talk several years ago about just kind of the power of video chat and seeing the face of the person so much. I'm going off on a tangent here, but so much of our communication as humans is nonverbal, right? And so when you remove that and you're talking on the phone or removing another label layer and you're slacking someone or instant messaging or text messaging, and then yet another level is kind of email where there's no sense of time and everything. I think it's just you feel further and further and further away from an actual interaction of being in the same room with someone. So yeah, I think video chat is super powerful to see the face of the person as opposed to just hearing what they say even.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, oftentimes we'll be walking through a prototype or have them using the prototype, and then just they won't say anything, but you'll just like look at their face and you'll be like, oh man, maybe I should rethink about how we're structuring that, or even just nomenclature, like what we're writing on the screen or whatever. Like, oftentimes people give away a lot without saying anything.
Yes, it's so interesting that you just mentioned writing on the screen. If I understood that correctly, are you talking about the words that you're using in the interface to describe what's going on? So important, right? And a lot of times and if you don't test that, you would never know because everyone inside of the organization says, oh, yeah, that's what you call this thing. That should make perfect sense to people, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million terms people use for everything. So often, like, there's one little screen that we have like for integrations, and when you're integrating Okta, there's the Okta tenant, but there's also the Okta integration. So do you call it like these are your connected tenants, or do you can say these are connected integrations? And we had a couple customers who got like hung up on like the term tenant. Like, should we call it an integration or should we call it a tenant? And that was like them just reading tenant on the screen and just like sitting there and thinking about it for a second. And even that hesitation was like, all right, well, obviously there's opportunity to be more clear here. So let's try to figure out like that allows us to ask follow-up questions like, what's confusing about the term tenant? Like, should it be called something else? Do you think about it as something else? Yeah.
I'm having deja vu with a conversation I had with a client and then with users around using the term namespace. Like half the people we talked to said that's absolutely the term to use. Half the people we talked with said, I don't understand that at all. So it's even just little things like that, right? That can really hang up a product, especially if you're wanting to get to the point where you're no longer white gloving new users, but it needs to just kind of, at scale, people understand and go through and sign up for the product without the sales team getting super involved. Just becomes higher and higher stakes, right?
Oh man, I have so many examples of just copy and using the right terms is so important, especially in cybersecurity.
Yes, I 100 agree with you on that. Yes, yes. Dude, this has been super, super fascinating. I'm just talking with you and hearing about your experience and everything. I've got one question I want to ask at the end here. If you were going to have a conversation with an early stage founder, I know you recently have had lots of conversations with them. What is the one piece of advice you would give to them from the perspective of UX and UI?
I mean, obviously I'm going to say it's incredibly important. Most people I guess there is a trope around UI and UX. Like most people will try a product because of the UI and they'll stay with a product because of the UX. So if you want, like, if you have the idea, if you're like an early stage founder, you have traction and you're getting, like, you have a problem that definitely needs to be solved and been validated, and you have customers that are willing to say, like, when can I try this product? You do not have UX or UI designer or someone who, like, even a consultant you've talked to or spoken to, like, definitely that should be like step number 2 is go get a product designer, go talk to a consultant, go talk to somebody who has a good understanding of UX and UI. I mean, it's so, like, important. I can't emphasize it enough. I mean, think about, like, all the products you use in day to day. I mean, it's a good thought experiment. Like, think, and maybe this is what I would say to them too. Think about all the digital products you use every single day. I mean, literally, it's everywhere. From your toothbrush, the minute you wake up, to like getting into your car, to going to the doctor's office, like everything is digital now. And now think about, what is the last time you had a product that you're like, damn, that was awesome. That was like a really good experience. There's only a handful of them that I can really think of. And those are the ones that like stick with you the most. Like, off the top of my head, the like for digital products, like we're using Posthog for web analytics. Their product is awesome. I love Posthog. Their branding is great too. It's ridiculous, but I love their branding. Like, it's different, and their product is thoughtful. Like, it's thorough. Like, they've thought about the edge cases, and that's really important. Like the Home Depot, when you're in Home Depot and you're doing self-checkout, they have the big screen and it just works, and you touch everything and it's got the little scanner. Every time I go through Home Depot, I'm like, there's only one thing I would fix on that, but like generally that experience is excellent. Like, they nailed it. They clearly did. Like, someone at Home Depot cared about UX, because like that self checkout is awesome, and then you compare that to the self checkout at the grocery store, and it's horrible. Like, how those two exist in the same universe is beyond me, because like clearly someone nailed it, and then there's a whole folks over here that don't even care about like just copying the people who nailed it. But and then you like use the products that suck. Most of them are just like DMV, healthcare, like these things that are like really important, that should be pretty simple, are just brutal, and everyone hates them. And you spend most of your time hating on the product that stinks versus like celebrating the ones that are awesome. But then ones you do find that are awesome, you're just like, I'm never going to leave it. Like, I'm always going to use this product because it's amazing, and they were thoughtful and thorough, and they thought about me as the user. Like, that's the reason why you hire product. Like, that's why you hire a UI UX person, right? It's because when you're done using it, you walk away, and then you turn around and someone's like, hey, have you ever used like a checkout app before? Or have you used like an app that does identity management or identity security? And they're like, ooh, yeah, dude, you have to use this tool. Don't even bother with anything else. Just use this tool. This is the one you want to use. And then that person you tell it to is probably not even going to do research. They're just going to be like, all right, we should use this tool because the person I trust told me to go use this tool. And that's like earned media. Like, you can't pay for like a better like advocate for your product than that one person. And that's all because product design, like UX and UI.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself, especially when you said the Home Depot example, I was like, yes, that is absolutely the experience I've had. Like, it just works. It doesn't ask me what language I want to use to begin with, and I have to press something to move forward, right?
It's responsive. It's great.
I know.
The only
The
thing I would
scanner
change
just
is like,
works.
yeah, my daughter. Okay, so I know we're going over. I
It's okay.
apologize. But when my daughter picked up, she's 5. When she picks up her iPhone, she just totally knows how to use it. When I go to Home Depot, she just knows how to check out. Like, that to me is like, if you're building a product for the masses, for like general, not security products, but just products in general, like if a 5-year-old can do it, you pretty much nailed it. The only thing I would change about Home Depot is say, no receipt, don't print anything, because when you return stuff, you can just swipe your card. Like, save the paper. I wonder how much money Home Depot would save if they just had no receipt option. Probably a bunch.
You can just have it emailed with no receipt.
Yeah, but like, I don't even want an email receipt.
Well, yeah.
I just want nothing.
Yeah, I'm a filter away from that being a problem in my life.
That's a good point. I guess I am the edge case.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. All right, cool. So, Ty, this has been fantastic. I've really enjoyed just nerding out with you on UX and UI product design stuff. Appreciate you
Thank
being
you for
here
having
today
me.
and talking with me. And thanks a lot.